Hey, well, welcome to this and that. This one will finish up what we were looking at yesterday. 1024. Uh, Only communism obliterates all aspects of commodity exchange, value, money, etc. We aren't there. No one's there. Fiddling around with certain ideas about sublation, valorization, and indexicality, because I think there's a way of tying these things together. But there's a lot of other stuff that needs to be done first. So yesterday we looked at Harry Cleaver's um, diagram for the um, the structure of the argument for Karl Marx's Capital Volume 1. And it goes from commodity to values to form of exchange value to money form to market exchange to money commodity to money, then to capital, the buying and selling of labor power, and then to class struggle. Bunch of stuff there, 1,000 pages, whatever. The simplified version of these matters ultimately comes in interesting diagrams like David Harvey's diagram. And you want to ask the sort of question, well, where's Department 1 and Department 2 here? They are there. It occurs in a fairly complicated way because there's all these arrows and stuff, but it's actually moderately simple. That is, we have two moments for commodities, and that's sort of what Christopher Arthur is sort of talking about. You know, commodities do get produced, but the production of value is a series of things that can be, I think, interpreted, even explained in a Hegelian way. Some of it has to do with what we get when we encounter commodities. There's a difference between the use values that we encounter when we're sitting at home or whatever, but once we step into society, value becomes, socially related, let's put it that way. And so if we were looking for Department 1 and Department 2, that is the means of production and the means of consumption or the means of distribution, Departments 1 and Department 2, where we find it in a David Harvey diagram, well, it's there. It's just that you need to see that, as Chris Arthur will describe, there's sort of two moments for commodities. There's the front end of commodities that's being produced in the production sector in Department 1 that it comes because trouble is coming in, you make stuff. And then establishing the value is a sort of second moment. And that's kind of what Chris Arthur's talking about, or the way it tries to integrate Hegel into the value form. And that is kind of what goes on, right? You go into a store, you confront, you're not thinking about value necessarily, but when you come up with something that sort of triggers that question of value, do I really need this? Or do I just simply want it? And why do I want it? For what reasons do I want it? All of those things are there. Does it spark joy? Is it related to sustenance? All of those things are there. And so consumer effective demand is at the one end, right? That's kind of what goes on. Go to the store. That's the second moment of commodities, the realization of value in money form. How much does it cost? And then you got to go to the checkout and blah, blah, blah. So this is all kind of Department 1, but it's also part of Department 2, which is distribution here, right? Because, I don't have enough in my pocket. I need to get credit, blah, blah, blah. And all of these things are at work. How much is it really going to cost me? Or am I going to buy this on credit, for example, and increase my debt and then increase my debt service, et cetera? So in terms of an individual action, a behavioral action, there are questions of uniqueness that I think Chris Arthur raises about, well, how important is this damn thing to me? And is it for me, or is it for my family, or is it for work, or something else, status, whatever. So Departments 1 and Department 2 are actually there. You can see that. And what we've been looking at more recently is the question of finance, which is all of this jazz over here on the right hand. And of course, for those of us who are interested in what David Harvey is doing is trying to combine all of these elements. And his concern, of course, as a geographer is, the spatial kind of array of these things. And as he says, he's not much of a Hegelian. He is a Hegelian. He just doesn't sort of, it is hard. And there is a kind of bad rabbit hole that you go down with certain Hegelian ideas, depending on how you want to interpret it. And of course, historical materialism is this underlying background of thought against which, we continually measure ourselves simply because it is foundational and yet it is problematic for a variety of historical reasons. Some are kind of more complicated than others, and that's left for another suggestion. So you could separate out the commodity and not even sort of talk about it. There's no commodity in this diagram, but circuits of capital still involve it. Stuff's still getting consumed. Capital is still necessary. Stuff happens, except that at one level, and this is more, as we saw in the above diagram, something a little more concerned with this distributional side here. That is the structure of relations between primary, secondary, and tertiary circuits of capital. Remember, I've talked about the embedded sort of nested sets of capital. The capital has multiple circuits. They interrelate. They sit within and without one another, and they relate in a variety of ways. You could say there's a circuit of fictitious capital. We're nowhere close to there yet. And in fact, it would be an interesting argument with all due respect to Napoleon book chapter there somewhere about, and there are articles on fictitious capital, so I'm not making this stuff up, to discuss specific circuits. So you want to think of this thing like a, sort of terrible cake with multiple layers, and all these things are going on, and something sort of connects all these matters. By the end of the Chris Arthur article, because it is a discussion of the value form, the current position, as it were, and one, as I said, I haven't sort of quite figured out because I haven't read the new two Pauls version of the new translation of Capital in English, which came out a couple of weeks ago. So I'm going to get there eventually, and I also will work out the software problem. I think it's on my computer somewhere, or it's because of my computers. Anyway. That bridge to consciousness, as they say, where we're in, on the one hand, at the front end, you aren't, you are freed of inhibition, and you're not really quite self-reflective, or if you're a little too introverted, that's kind of where you go. So the sensuous, super sensuous thing is that kind of motion or movement between the departments, between what's being made, how you confront it in a market, and then how you deal with it. What do you pay for it with? And that's the money connection. That's where the current research is, I would say, at least a center, among many different centers of research. The modern money theory is one element of that, but it's not the only element. You can't reduce it all to that. And in fact, once you start prescribing policy, it gets all ugly. So that's the thing we talked about earlier. That is the what Arthur was looking at in this sort of section 1 are questions of the dialogue, questions of Hegelianism. questions of how to get to a certain kind of mentality. That's sort of the
I'm not hearing
is
audio.
part of.
Oh, now you're back.
Hello?
Now you're back. Your audio dropped out there for a bit.
Are we back? Hello?
Yeah, I
Testing
can hear you now. Yeah.
pronto. Okay. So anyway, the point is that the first part is about dialectical entities, about trying to be systematic. As Christopher Oxford will say, systematic dialectic is a method of exhibiting the inner articulation of a given whole. Science, in treating such a totality, must elucidate a set of categories capturing the forms and relations constitutive of the totality in an ordered presentation. That's what he's trying to do here. Now, the next question is a sort of math question, with all due respect. There's a significant homology between the movement of exchange, generating a system of pure forms of value abstracted from the natural specificity of commodities. So we're confronted with the commodities. We have a situation where we want to figure out value. And of course, at a micro level, it's, what does it mean to me? The Trumpian narcissism, right? But on the other hand, it's like, well, maybe this is not sustainable to do this. Plastic bags, blah, 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 whatever. So all of these questions go on. The movement of thought generating Hegel's system of logical categories abstracted from the real material world. So all of this is a discussion of the world, our engagement with the world, and without getting into a whole thing that Hegel does in his phenomenology, is that we try to work through value questions. And Marx is, of course, engaged in that. This is his issue relative to the young Hegelians and Feuerbach, et cetera. Some people really get into it, that's it's so cool to do that. But his argument with, for example, the young Hegelians is precisely on that, because, well, I can get really into this and, but there are those people in trouble, and I sort of care about them one way or the other. And of course, there's screens, lights and stuff. So we're
Those
only
are
looking.
sound.
Hello, hello. And so that's kind of the issue. So what he's looking at is this more isolated or specific element of more recent Marxian thought, that is, in the Heinrich sense of value form discussions. That is, here, I analyze the value form as such, bracketing the origins of the object of exchange. Remember, exchange is the key element here. It's not about use. I mean, there's always going to be use. There's use value is always there. How am I going to use this? But the value form argument is based on the issue of exchange, that it is when the engagement, the social engagement with reality, you're out there, you're buying crap, you are confronted with crap, stuff is mediated to you. It's mediated to you because you were ordered to go pick something up or whatever. It's the exchange that becomes more important, or even the imagined exchange, which is the whole business of online buying. So exchange abstracts only from what is presented to it, a delimited sphere of use values. So the dialectic of capital is less general than Hegel's in scope, but within its own terms, equally absolute, insofar as it's founded on all-round abstraction to leave quasi-logical forms of being of commodities. So this is the deal with commodities, right? Stuff's there. It's out there. It's out there because you're out there. You're not at home, or you're not extended into reality on your computer or whatever. And so, you have to think about, well, these stuff's out there, commodities, things I can buy, things I must use, things I must buy for others. All that stuff is there. Commodities are one manifestation of that form. And of course, in order to make too much crap, or because they've accumulated too much crap or inherited too much crap, they've got to get rid of it. Stuff happens, and it is the mediating forms like money that become, important. But it is not money itself. So the whole system here is about a series of abstractions, of increasing abstraction that probably happen when you step out the damn door or get onto your computer and enter the internet or whatever. So there is a logic to it. The whole point is that there's enough thought out there, even thought from the 19th century before electronics, that you have to sort of, okay, I got to work, I got to deal with this. What's happening here? I have to set priorities. I have to make decisions. I have to behave in a way that works out well for me or my family or my tribe or whatever. And so a lot of thought has to go in, and it is about thought. It's not about simply mechanically moving forward, even though it's so damn easy to do that. So, and without, so he, Hegel talks about, sort of how do we categorize all this stuff? Same thing that Kant's worried about, and among a bunch of other folks. But there is this question of what the meaningfulness of it, the kind of ontological question. What does it mean to me? What does it mean to my family? What does it mean to, Hegel shows how an ideality builds itself up moment by moment into a self-actualizing totality, an absolute. Now, it doesn't mean it's static. It just means that, it's all there. It's that, the veils fall and you sort of are aware, more completely aware. Whether it's total or not, well, I have to shoot more heroin and then you're dead. But, that's kind of the failure of addiction in that sense. If then, as I believe capitalism has in part an ideal reality, some people believe that, then it can be shown to incarnate Hegel's blueprint. It may be self-sustaining in the same way. Hegel's logic can be drawn on in such a study because capital is a very peculiar object, grounded in a process of practical abstraction in exchange, in much the same way as Hegel's dissolution and reconstruction of reality is predicated on the abstractive power of thought. So, with all due respect, a dope like Elon Musk is going to get out there and because of its ego or a narcissism, he believes he has a better handle on this. No, he's just got more money. That's all, more capital. So this is self-actualizing. It is an ontologic specific to capital because it has relevance only to a system of self-moving abstractions. That's the difference between commodity 1 and commodity 2, as I was putting out in David Harvey's example. There's the commodity you produce. You're sitting on the assembly line. You're making the damn thing. And then there's, its actual, thing out there. The Cybertruck, is only truly measurable once you have to, actually drive the damn thing. So these are important issues, and we talked about that yesterday. And I tried to get to it by discussing different ways of constructing the argument of the forms of value. And this is done in a Hegelian way. Christopher Arthur does this because there is actually a separate manuscript that actually describes the value form. So people have sort of fixated on this, like Heinrich, among others, by saying, well, it has an elemental form in the Grundrisse, and then it comes back again, only because it's sort of still floating around. And if we're looking at it, maybe it's anachronistic to be engaged in that kind of process. So that was section 1 yesterday, which I yammered on about. So today we're going to get a little further down into this, but the conclusion of that section is he talks about one thing, commodity 1, commodity 2, and then he talks about commodity 3. That is per thing. Now, that's exactly like
Prof. Van, we lost you a little bit. We can't hear you.
shoot. I don't know what right.
You're back now.
Not my fault. I will just keep talking, and the reading is there. So the reading is always there. So I'm not that necessary. To sum up the being of value, this is an ontic question. Exchangeableness is a category of quality. Quantity to it of imminent exchangeability. So there's this first moment and a second moment. You sort of, the thing is sort of, has possibilities, but it's only, and without reducing it to the market, there is this set of social relations which talk to us about exchange. What can we do with it? This seems, it could fulfill me by doing this. I'll wear it home, whatever. Designating the power of exchange intrinsic to a commodity, value is its essence. Now, the problem, of course, is that essence can be viewed either, sort of figuratively or literally. That is, some people reduce it to that, right? Biology is destiny, et cetera, et cetera. You don't have blah, 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 so therefore you're not a blah, blah, blah. I don't know. That possession is not always, 9/10 the law. It is about other kinds of social constructions. That's kind of the current problem in culture. So without going off into the woods, let's get to section 2, which we weren't at yesterday. The forms of value, money. So, you've gone through this period of sort of the forms. They seem exchangeable. There's exchangeability. And we can exchange, or it can be realized. That's the next step. It's a kind of realization. It's bringing it to reality, which of course becomes a bunch of other things, a buyer's remorse, right? That's a whole nother antagonism that comes when either it's because you're guilty about the money you spent, or that it's a selfish purchase, or whatever. All kinds of stuff like that happens. There are protesters outside, whatever. Let us review how we determine value as essence. We take the abstract equivalence of the measures to result in an indifferentness to all categories of being. In other words, you're trying to create a system or set of margins. This is the theory of kind of utility theory of marginal analysis. You try and isolate the thing, whatever it is. You confer upon it a certain framing, as it were, a kind of attention that we pay to it. In other words, you've selected out of all the stupid things on the clearance table, this thing. What about it is important? This points to value as such. That's the essence of the commodity. But such an assumption has to be vindicated in the further development of the exposition. Now, you can see this can be scaled up from what I have been describing in examples as individual consumer behavior, as opposed to market behavior or group behavior or something. If the commodity has something essential to it, then it is value in itself, distinct from the relativity of exchange values. In other words, it's out there to sell stuff, and people will buy it. Maybe you forced it because it's a point of sale item or blah, blah, blah. Things are going on here, but there is this sort of process that's going on that is phenomenological, but you don't want to go that way necessarily. What we're looking at here is Christopher Arthur's attempt to see it within the context of Marx as a quote unquote form. Now, form is not a container. Form is just simply a structure. You need to get that from a lexical point of view. You need to say, okay, it's not D.H. Lawrence. Women are not containers. It's more than that. And, you sort of you move beyond that. The relation between the two is illuminated by Hegel's category of reflection. Important in the development of reflection is the dialectic of presupposition and posit. So there's a moment at which you assume certain things, and then you actually make a decision about, there is this kind of refining. And yes, there's a whole procedure there that I won't get into, but if you look at it from continental philosophy, there are these little moments, and you sort of, you become more aware of shit. As certain philosophers would say, that you achieve the Dasein, and that's the other thing we were talking about earlier. Initially, the distance between essence and appearance appears unbridgeable, because we said the immanent unity of measure is indifferent. You see it 2 paragraphs above, we're talking about we're looking for something more ideal that this isn't necessarily, you can't see all the contingencies there. Is indifferent to the contingent specifying measures. So I don't know how it connects. Although they are analytically presupposed, that's that presupposition thing, value is to be taken apart from them. So now we have this new thing called, value. How important and value in this particular restrictive sense as meaning, is to be taken apart from them. So it seems value is essential and exchange value is inessential. So there's this kind of separation. It's not about the buying the thing. It's about, how important is it to me? Not because I just am out there with, money burning a hole in my pocket. A mere semblance, the shine of value, subject to extraneous influences, whereas value as such is the truth abiding within the shell of the commodity. Now, I know you're not thinking about that when you see something in the store, but you could. Not that that's perhaps a little crazy, a little OCD there, but there is that kind of set of motions or time passes. Let's put it that way. Just use older terms. Value posits itself against exchange value, as it were, but exchange value is the immediately given presupposition of value in the first place. You went out there because, you're in the market. You go in the front door, you go past the scanners, whatever. Whence this value? If it arises simply from our external reflection on the set of exchange values, which yields value as our abstraction from it, this reduction means value as essence is not grasped as self-specifying in its appearance. Exchange value remains external to it. So we're talking about a process here. And yes, there's an entire philosophy for this, but don't get too crazy about it. It is about mediating one's relationship to external reality. Exchange value kind of, you don't notice that, it's part of a supply chain, part of a whole consumer demand deal. It's part of advertising. It's part of merchandising. It's part of capitalism. It's how stuff is available or not available. Conversely, if we simply take value as given essence prior to exchange value, this lacks grounds. What is required is that value itself posits exchange value as its presupposition and herewith posits itself. We require a determining reflection, to borrow Hegel's term. That is, you sort of need to come to a position about making a decision, your sense of self in the world, whatever. So in the footnote from this article, circulation is posited as both presupposition and result of the immediate process of production. The dialectical status of the sphere of circulation, Department 2, thus shifts from being the immediate appearance of a process behind it, because we often think of that, theory and practice, or something's always behind it, whatever that means, to being the posited form of appearance of this process. And of course, Grundrisse is involved because that's when, it's an earlier document, and that's when Marx was sort of thinking about this. He's thinking about, well, now how does this damn stuff work? Because he's still engaged with Hegel in that particular moment. So we turn to the determination of reflection. Remember what reflection is. It's not simply a mirror relationship. Rather, it is not the physical mirror itself, but rather it is a series of thinking about your perceptions of something. And that is the orientation that you have with the mirror. That is, it's never, but although you could set up the mirrors to do that, it's never a perfect reflection. It is a distortion by definition. In the movement of reflection upon itself, the commodity must achieve identity with itself as value. Yet value is other than its immediate being as a material body. So, you buy something, you have something to go to, you're dressed up with no place to go, and that's always problematic. But if you are sort of prom dresses, for example, you want to think, well, can I get other use out of this? Or is it just simply like maid of honor dresses? You can never reuse them, and they're incredibly ugly. Thus, value is not, after all, immediately identical with the commodity, but is different from it. Okay, so there's always this sort of sense of difference. I talked about this yesterday. So this requires explicitly the mediating moment of being different from itself when value is made manifest only in another commodity. That may sound confusing to you, but the mediation is going on all the time. Mediation is a multiple fold process. You see something, you interact with it, and either directly or indirectly, and you make a series of decisions in relationship to its, whether it's a sign of safety or a sign of death or whatever. There's all those things are going on in mediated moments. Their results, therefore, the contradiction that value is and it's not found in the commodity. The commodity has all of those things, car seat, probably okay for your kid, but if you haven't read all the data about it, could kill your damn kid, whatever. The value form in which commodity A expresses its value in commodity B gives the contradiction a ground, allowing coexistence of the moments, as we shall show. Okay, the whole point here is that you have multiple moments that they're instantaneous almost, but you know that they have a certain linearity to them. Now you throw certain moments away and you keep other moments, and it could be make you crazy, but you have to just sort of get past these challenges. In its very constitution, value is opposed to use value. However, in the value form, we find the value that is not use value. So that is not use value A is born by use value B. That's that moment between A and B. Analytically, the value of the commodity and its use value are abstract opposites that fall apart. But within the value form, which exists in the relation of commodity to commodity, okay, this is because you are comparing use value A with use value B. And yes, that may seem, oversimplified, but in fact, we're moving from the simple example to the general form. This is the micro version. You go, I don't like this, don't like that. This thing's too expensive. This thing, weighs too much. This thing, blah, 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 blah. But within the value form, which exists in the relation of commodity to commodity, instead of falling apart, the opposing determinations of the commodity are reflected against one another. Now, at one level, this is just comparative analysis. Well, that one's bigger. That one's not so big. In art history, you're making a connoisseurship decisions. Well, it doesn't look like Leonardo did that. It has this, it's just not quite the same sfumato that you would use, the criteria of sfumato, and the Mona Lisa does not refer to the whatever it is, Mundi. So whatever. Let us turn to the forms of appearance of value presented by Marx in his Capital. In the ordinary way, there's nothing wrong with thinking of a unitary essence manifesting itself in different appearances. So there's something that connects all these Virgin Mary pictures. Oh, there's Mary. There's the kid. Now, in the earlier stuff, the kid looks like a little adult, which is not the same, right? In later versions of the Madonna and Child, it's a kid. It's an actual kid rather than a little adult. So that, is that progress or not? It's the same kid, right? Jeebus, right? So why does Marx speak of defects or deficiencies in the expression of value? The problem here is that no unitary essence is yet posited, although one must be if values can be present in the manifold commodity relation. So if something connects it all, then you sort of have to sort of buy this. This problem does not arise if one holds that immediately social labor time has been given us this unitary essence, right? So we're moving to the next level of abstraction. It's not labor, it's about labor power. Social labor time is not the labor itself, but it is the time devoted to it. Then quite naturally, one reads the development of forms of value as realizations of this given identity in commodities, and there are no defects because all forms are adequate expressions of value. In your little brain, it's all the same, or sufficient anyway, and all that is required to show how the money commodity emerges as a numeraire. See, that's the next step. is that you have to sort of say, okay, well, there's something that can connect these, and this is how I assess value because the dollar is worth X amount. And if you've done any, money changing, how, it is irritating and annoying that happens. And you either get real and say, well, I just have to accept the fact that I need to get from here to the city from my airplane, and I do need a bunch of cash, and I haven't saved any for my last trip of foreign currency. So I've got to bite the bullet here and get. So am I going to exchange $100 or $50 or $20? And what are they going to charge me to do this? And you go through all these little cogitations about questions of value because it's money. At first sight, it seems the simple form of value, implicit in commodity relations, exhibits value adequately. This form is, form one, the simple form of expression of value. Now, this idea of form one, note is, Z of commodity A, don't get crazy about the algebra. Z of commodity A expresses its value in Y of commodity B. In this elementary form of value, if value appears in accordance with its law of appearance, then both related commodities take specific forms of value, such as the commodity in relative form A expresses its value in its equivalent B. So this argument is going to continue on and will get expanded at scale, because once it moves to scale, that is multiple events, it's going to get a little more complicated. So the commodity in relative form is the active pole expression because the commodity whose value is to manifest itself. It is a, active and passive poles, blah, blah, blah. Ideally, value is determined in opposition to the heterogeneity of use value. So there is value and then there's use value. So this explains when you go to volume 1 of Capital, Marx is not opposing exchange value and use value, even though they are oppositional. He's interested in the big V value, and use value is a subordinate element. So, and it shifts around a little bit in terms of language use, but it is value versus all other things. The big V is there. Now, the point is, of course, by the time we get to the end of yammering around about this, it is about labor and what gets reduced to labor, or what is labor's relationship to it. So that's kind of the big picture. So until we get there, we're worrying a little bit more about individual decision-making and thinking about how is it that I'm going to assign meaning or value to a set of decisions or activities that I need to sort of philosophically make when I, go out into the world. Paradoxically, the claim that A is a value requires A to exclude this value from itself and deposit it as, well, maybe use value B, even if B is itself potentially a value, its value expression. Now, this is, you need to get a sense that there's sort of value being communicated, and then value as something expressed that is mediated, presented. There's a little bit different. It's a denotative versus a connotative relationship.
Am I the only one who can't hear anything?
Me too.
We're losing your audio again. Sounds like you're under several pillows.
I'm just here doing my damnedest. I think it's because maybe it's Joe and the Turkish connection. Not that my connection is any better. How shall I proceed? How shall I proceed?
Well, now we can hear you.
What the hell, man? I don't know.
We can hear you now.
Okay, testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Can you
Alright.
hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. All right.
I think it's a bandwidth. It seems like Bluetooth.
Come here. I need you. What is it that Alexander Graham Bell says?
What? Watson, please come. Watson, come here. I need you.
That's right. Anyway, without getting too far, the point is that there's something that connects all of this stuff together, and it's not quite complete, and it is less complete or more complicated as you have more objects, that is A in relationship to B, C, D, and other things. Form 2 is the expanded form of value. That is the expanded form of expression of value. And this is the point that, you know, you have an individual set of decisions or choices, your perception of the thing, and multiple perceptions of multiple things. So Z of commodity A expresses its value in Y of commodity B, or X of commodity C, or W of commodity D, or so on and so forth. The point here is the or. The difference in Form 2 and Form 3 is the difference between and or. This is a Boolean. You know, you can, you know, there's stuff and or gates. You know, there's a point at which it's either it does one thing or the other, or it does both. So, unless you think that that's, you know, it's not complicated. It's kind of basic logic stuff. Some things are both, some things are either. And it may seem relatively simple, but it's incredibly complicated when you begin to sort of add moral conditions and stuff to these things, you know, trolleys and blah, blah, blah. At first sight, it seems this expanded form presupposes that the value of A remain unaltered in magnitude, whether expressed in units of B, C, or D, or in innumerable other commodities. But this is not all plain, since all these commodity equivalents are incommensurable. That is, they can't quite be used as a substitute. Notice also that the connector here significantly is or, not and. When reversed in the general form, it will be and. And so why in the expansion of the simple form is it the connector or which links the various equivalents? So these are alternate uses of value logically implicit in the relationship among commodities. The lack of unitary essence is a defect of this simple form. So there is something that goes on in this that is called a reversal. And reversal may mean that we move from the perspective of commodity A, expressing its value in B, to that of a commodity B, taking A as its equivalent. Now that, you know, it's relatively simple, but the idea is, you know, something else is going on here, and you actually make that kind of decision in your brain. The two expressions being considered side by side, so to speak, as covering the same content, but different formally, in that the sense of the expression runs in a different direction. Nothing significant is changed if a whole set of commodity A's equivalents is reversed, such that A is the common point of reference. So this is just, you know, some things begin to move around. Another meaning of reversal is that what is reversed is the original expression of commodities A value in its equivalence, such that this origin is preserved in the reversed expression, along with positing activity of commodity A. The two expressions are not side by side, but dialectically determined as related through opposition. Okay, so there's a thing where you're just looking at stuff and they can be compared and they're sort of identical, but not identical. But then there you move to a next step, which is this dialectical move. It's about negation, you know. negation, and particularly negating becomes a real problem. You know, you dialectically determine, you relate it through opposition, through developing the meaning of A's determination of value. So this is the second point of view adopted by Chris Arthur. The significance of this dialectic of reversal is rooted in the asymmetry of the poles of the value expression. Marx's use in his discussion of this, of the terms active and passive, is an unmistakable reference to Hegel's dialectic of force and expression. Say force is active, expression is passive, upon which we shall draw in the following discussion. This dialectic is powered by the contradiction that the force, the active thing, is supposed to belong to the thing just as it is. Yet an unexpressed force is no force at all. However, to be expressed, it requires its solicitation by other things. So there is a kind of actualization, as it were, and that, you know, Hegel doesn't talk about it in that way, but in fact, that's kind of what sort of is going on, particularly as how other people pick up on this set of ideas. These others must themselves therefore be forces, while a force proves itself only in its expression, in its effect on something. The nature of the latter is the necessary complement of the force. So all the way back to the cliche, gravity attracts apples but not rainbows. The force requires solicitation by that which suffers its effect. The first force and the soliciting force, two forces, are therefore merely two moments of a whole relation and share a common content. This is, in another philosophical tradition, what situation means. These things become situational. Just so, if commodity A expresses its value in a definite amount of commodity B, at the same time it's enabled by B to reflect on its nature as value, B solicits A to recognize it as the means whereby value may be realized. This is just a better damn choice. It follows the commodity A just insofar as it posits commodity B as its own equivalent. Conversely, posits itself as the relevant referent of B's proper expression of itself. So therefore, there's other things about it, other meanings that are kind of attached to it. Better packaging, better terms of whatever, payment, whatever. It presupposes that it is the value equivalent of B. If all the commodities in equivalent form solicit a value expression of A in this way, this allows A to posit itself as their unitary equivalent. The dialectic moves from commodity A determining the use value B as the expression of value because it cannot be use value A to commodity A, determining itself as containing the essence of value when it reflects all the original alternative equivalents into itself. So this can be confusing, of course. Abstracting out this reverse movement, this is the negation of the negation thing that dialectics talks about, gives the general form of value. In other words, because of this critical activity, you can refer to it as a kind of critical activity. This reframing, this reimagining becomes, a general form. To remind ourselves, this is form 3, the general form of expression of value, Y of commodity B and X of commodity C and W of commodity D, and so on. Express their value in Z of commodity A. In this form, the commodity A solicits all the other commodities to solicit it as their unitary form of value. Now, this is a procedural thing that takes a simple binary comparison to something which is more widely configured. Does this thing do the job that a whole bunch of other things? And this is not a simple example, but there's a Simpson episode where Homer discovers a long-lost relative who owns a car company, and not unlike Elon Musk, decides to revisit their relationship. That is, this long-lost relative or whatever, and allows Homer to be head of design. And Homer designs an incredibly screwed up design of a car. And so there's a whole question of, obviously trust and blah, 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 blah. But these are kind of examples. There's a kind of solicitation that goes on in there. Thus, A, while now the universal equivalent, does not simply assume the role of passive equivalent, as it would do if we considered an original one-sided relation of B, C, and D to A. It preserves its active role because it attracts the other commodities to express their value in it as a unitary form. Okay, this is a lot of yammering around here, but it is about the difference between individualism and collective kind of stuff. And so it suggests a certain kind of, other kind of set of activities. Cooperation, if you want to extrapolate further, but that's down the road. It determines itself thus as essentially value because it becomes value for itself rather than merely implicit value as in its original position. So value not only must appear when the value of commodity A appears it's what it's not, mainly commodity B, if it is to be actual, and actual is a real important thing here about actualizing, it must appear as what it is in this particular case as a commodity, exchangeableness as such. And that is what is present in the universal equivalent role because it attracts the other commodities to express their value in it as a unitary form. It determines itself thus as essentially value, becomes value for itself. It gives you a better handle on what big V value is, rather than merely implicit value as in its original position. So in other words, you have to sort of, really engage it, whatever that means. And, there's whole philosophical schools engaged in that. So value must not only appear when the value of commodity A appears that it's what it's not, mainly commodity B. If it is to be actual, it must appear as what it is, exchangeableness as such. And that is what is present in the universal equivalent. As the outcome of the dialectical and not formal reversal, A now contains remember that word, sublation, right? Sublated form, the opposition of relative form and equivalent form within itself, actively determining itself to the position of value in autonomous form and attracting the other commodities to it accordingly. Now, that's all a way of trying to talk about labor power ultimately. And I know this is kind of the really long way to get to it, but it is, how we distinguish between, personal labor, individual labor, and kind of collective labor or labor power, labor as an abstraction. For the opposition of active and passing poles is itself sublated in the general form. Now there's the reciprocity force to be concretized in the money form. See, this is that moment where, because it can be generalized, then we can convert it, as it were, in money. This is that moment we make where, well, how many dollars per hour is it? What is minimum wage? And of course, we are in a current period of clearly contradiction where the federal minimum wage is $7.25 per hour. And yet, there's all this agitation about $15 an hour. And, this is dissonant, right? I mean, why isn't it $15 an hour? And that simple manipulation could change the entire damn economy. Now, there is reciprocity of forces to be concretized in the money form such that it is useless to ponder whether commodity value expresses itself only in money or whether money attracts commodities to it only because it counts as value as such. And this misidentification of what counts as value is sort of the whole Trump story. The general form is an advance on the simple form in which the positing of the equivalent as value is the result of the activity of the commodity in relative form, hence not self-positive. I know that's a little confusing, but with the general form reached through the dialectic of force and expression, the original commodity A, now the universal equivalent, retains its active role in expressing itself through its relation to the other commodities. But now, instead of positing them as its equivalents, it posits itself as theirs. Moreover, just as it is, so it is value incarnate. Okay, so in a concrete way, the fact that we're all just talking about why isn't, $15 should be the minimum, and why isn't it the minimum? It's not de jure, that is by law, the minimum. And that's a big damn problem because we've existed for several decades now at $7.25. And that, because all kinds of laws kick in once you, determine those numbers. Because up till now, an employer can get away with murder relative to the $15 an hour. And it's a minimum, and it technically, in terms of cost of living, blah, 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 consumer price index, blah, 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 should be more like $22 or $25 an hour. In no way should the general form be read as a set of simples. Okay, it's not all the an agglomeration of what we were looking at before of this individual 2-moment, 3-moment model. It's a whole bunch of stuff, neglecting the logic of the reversal because there are reversals at every moment. Because in the simple form, the equivalent is passive, but in the universal equivalent, actively determines itself to the position of value in autonomous form. So, without over-projecting this, this is more determinative. This has more force in it. This is a peculiarity of the equivalent form raised to a higher power. Now, the universal equivalent is posited as value for itself, a locus of intrinsic value. The general form of value is a unity of form. To begin with, we have this contrast between the sensuous appearance, the body of A, of a supersensuous world of value behind the body of the commodities such as B, C, and D, etc. This kingdom of laws is a first intelligible world. Intelligible here can be understood in Kantian terms as what gives sense to the manifold of valued bodies by granting them this essential meaning. There's a hierarchy, but in a second step, it emerges that as the universal equivalent, A, in its sensuous immediacy, it's a second intelligible world of value, which contrasts with the supersensuous world of value that A originally posited behind B, and so on. Okay. One example of this could be, the self-driving option. If every car, now let's just assume, just for yucks, that every car had the self-driving option like Teslas do. And, should it, what kind of world is that? The cars are different when you assume it can sort of do some things by itself, and a deep fake or a artificial, a viral thing, and I think it was on TikTok, showed a person in a foreign country, I assume, stopping before their little driveway, and rather than backing the car, the Tesla, into the parking space, into the driveway, they got out of the car, set the thing to back up and park itself, and it sort of gets there, but then hits a glitch and suddenly starts driving off by itself, leaving the person whose car it is running down the street after it. Now, needless to say, I assume it's a joke. It's a goof of some kind, but it is a kind of question about the life you think you have when it's actually, from an opportunity cost point of view, just as easy to be in the car as it backs up into the driveway, as opposed to getting out, pressing the button, and having it do. How much more work are you going to get done by stepping out of your car, pressing the button, and assuming that the car is going to park itself? But anyway, I know that was a long way of getting at that example, but these examples could exist. So the first world of value comprises the law-like expression of value in the body of A, and the second follows from the realization that if value is now A, then this equivalent itself is not just the effect of the law of value as a force expressing itself in it, but is itself value in another shape, namely immediate value. So this question of immanence is kind of built into this whole deal. That is, there's some kind of encounter or satisfaction that is, you could refer to it as a kind of situational thing. So instead of, or as well as value reflected back from the equivalent reflects value unto itself. So it adds or accumulates importance in that way. Because commodity A as a sensuous reality is at the same time value, a second world of value is posited at the level of sensuousness, complementing the supersensuous one. These two worlds of value, the sensuousness and the supersensuousness, stand in an inverted relationship to each other. They are not simply one on top of the other. The first one, value, is different from use value, whereas in the second one, value is identified with a use value body commodity A. So it is at one level just simply something that discriminates among things. But in the second one, it becomes more focused or specific. The second value world coexists with the first in that the material body of the universal equivalent does not just reflect into a visible world the hidden original supersensuous world of value, You know, how much more do you get out of this? It's more status to have your car park itself. It now, just as it is, counts as value in immediate shape. Well, in this one instance, which I have described here, you know, you can sell, as it were, the content just created for TikTok. And whether that's worth anything is a whole different question, but it did certainly capture 15 seconds of my reality. Because the originating moment is preserved in sublated form, we find the kingdom of value doubles into reflected and immediate totalities. In other words, it reproduces itself. It is realized in a wider context. In the universal equivalent value, originally defined in opposition to the use value of A, hence a supersensuous reality, is now use value a sensuous reality. In other words, more things have been manifested. This is outright identity of opposites, whereas in the simple form, value, defined as not use value A, is given in use value B. So it is supersensuous and sensuous at the same time, but in relation to two different commodities. In other words, you get a whole bunch of other things that come from this. Now, whether you can extrapolate that capital operates in this way is, you know, a kind of fundamental question, which Marx is sort of cogitating about in his earlier thinking about these things. The two worlds of value, the sensuous and the supersensuous, are here immediately one. The very same commodity contains both worlds. They're essentially related. The commodity, as I pointed out at the beginning of this yammering, is a sensuous, supersensuous thing. Now, we might call form 3 a general form of value because it's not yet determined which commodity is the universal equivalent, for commodity B could follow the same route as A did, such as it ends up as the focus of a general form, like in form 2. Hence, the universal equivalent posited in the intermediation of commodities does not yet establish its own ground to stand upon. A commodity functions as universal equivalent only if it alone successfully solicits the other commodities to recognize it as the only appropriate expression of their value. The universal equivalent must be a unique universal equivalent. This is the problem, of course, well, with all due respect, in live streaming issues of channel creation. In other words, some big companies have, you know, live streaming channel options, which are different forms of property that are not broadcast. They're not basic cable. They are something else. And this something else is a kind of promise, assuming that you think that they're better quality, is that you go to it because it is better quality. And some of us have been disappointed by Netflix or Paramount Plus or Disney Plus or whatever. But people get sucked into this, and of course, there recently was a law about that the Biden administration has, or the FTC has put into place about, you know, how difficult or easy is it to cancel a subscription. Let us lay out formally the problem using abbreviated expression. So, from form 4, the total form of value. Yes, we're still rolling along here. We're going to get to form 5 in a moment. Total expanded form is where you begin to multiply these things. And yes, those who do a little math, these can be seen as Bayesian, but that's another thing. Total expanded form, the value of ZA is YB or XC or WD, etc., as we saw in the general form. Or the value of YB is ZA or X, you know, etc. The total general form is the value of Z of YB and XC, and WD is ZA, etc. In this total form, there are two complementary moments. The total expanded form yields through its reversal the total general form. So we have two totals here. One is expanded, one, because a reversal has happened, you get a generalized form. Implicit then and exchange relations are a manifold of potential value expressions. In other words, because you've been able to force through some of these elements, the expansion of possibilities for value are there. There are many potential points of origin, such that we have multiple expanded forms, since in each of these, the expression the value of A is B is matched by an expression the value of B is A. You know, these are simple logical things. In another, they're exclusive of one another. A commodity in one instance is in relative position, and the rest is a partial equivalent. Likewise, the multiple general forms that we've just described involve putting a commodity in equivalent form once, but relative form in all others. All these general forms are potential ways to actualize value, but once again, these forms exclude one another. There is a certain argument about singularity or uniqueness in this. In these sets of potential value expressions, we find many alternative worlds of value presented, but these cannot coexist. It's like on my cable system, I just for a variety of reasons, technical reasons, I can't get, Disney Plus or Paramount Plus or whatever. Do I do badly about it? No, I have other issues, but it's interesting. Although these many universes of value are all possible, they are not impossible. That is, you can get them all at the same time. Yet we have not given adequate grounds for granting one of them actuality. See, you've gone through all these possibilities, but have you actually pulled the trigger and made it realized it? So let us now consider the transition from this impasse, this is all about decision making, to money. As Marx says, the defect of the general form is that the universal equivalent form can be assumed by any commodity. You could say, well, I could do it that way, I could do it that way. And then you sort of, become indecisive. Yet there cannot be more than one universal equivalent if value is to be a unitary sphere. Now, that's one of the basic assumptions, that things can become a unitary sphere. If you're engaged in other ways of thinking, there are no such unitary spheres. But anyway, therefore, some principle of selection must exclude all possibilities but one. Logically, there's nothing to distinguish them, but the problem was solved when social custom excluded all commodities but one, suggests Marx. Now, this question of how do you create value? Now, here we are at gold. Now, Marx's assumption of gold only existed for this pre-19th century model and doesn't include all of the other things that we get that have gold-like value. Things that were described in the Michael Hudson text about other things that have collateral, equivalents that become problematic because, well, it's not gold, but it's something. And as something, you owe money or whatever. Historically, gold was chosen, although something else could have been. At all events, the singularity of gold brings value relations to a focus and creates a homogeneous value space. Now, this homogeneous value space, in this particular context, and without distorting it too much, it's certainly what sort of stupid libertarians want when they say we've got to go back to a metallic standard. That way, the economy is more stable. Well, it's more stable, but it's also less efficient and doesn't grow quite in the same way. And while it has stability, it's not growing. So this is that trade-off. And, and yet you feel better about yourself, and you feel better because you hoarded all that gold, and hence the value is going up. Now, trying to force the entire world to do that only comes if you create enough chaos so that, like the dollar reserve currency already detached from gold is destroyed. And so the Peter Thiel version of this, and I'm not accusing him of being preferentially a gold bug, but you can see that some people will destroy everything in order to create more individualized value, right? So everything I was yakking about before, about in terms of simple value, is in fact simple-minded, and that there are simple-minded people still out there. So form 5, money form of value. This is the section which is, in Marx's Capital Volume 1, is why we spend far too much time on Volume 1 and Chapter 1, Volume 1, and because we're trying to figure out what is the equivalence between 20 yards of land and a coat, or 40 pounds of coffee and a coat, or an ounce of gold, or whatever. All of these equivalents, how do they express their value? An ounce of gold could do it. However, the transition to money is not at all an easy one. So steps in the argument, there are 3 steps. Possible formally that any commodity, a money commodity like gold, can serve as a universal equivalent, since any commodity could have served thus, that it is gold, appears contingent. So gold answers everything. Yeah, until the bandito comes up and tells you about his badge. The one that is actually selected must make itself necessary to the system. And so that's another kind of question. How is it injected into the system? How the money commodity achieves this is discussed. Well, the existence of money depends on the existence of other commodities as it correlates, but it acts as if exchangeableness in immediacy, then this mediation vanishes. So there's an attempt to reduce that. While these commodities are its analytical presuppositions as value for itself, money posited itself as not posited. It is to be taken at face value. Gold as value for itself presupposes that there are commodities to be valued by it, but only with money are commodities posited as values in themselves. So in other words, you're not going to, you're going to have to carry bars of gold around. It's just not going to happen. You have to create these other kinds of abstract forms in order to make it work better, right? Now, I hope you can think about that. It's just, if you're sufficiently fetishistic to be, Midas or whatever, that would be a problem. The upshot is that it is not commodities that are immediately values and then hence posit money as their mediated reflection. Rather, it is money that is determined as value in immediate shape and thus reflects value into such commodities as prove themselves saleable. So there's a contradiction here, right? Value as a unitary essence is posited once. Money constitutes this unity of form and practice. Moreover, only if the form of value is practically constituted does any material content become socially recognized. In other words, it can't be play money. It can't be monopoly money. It's got to be actual, linen, blah, blah, blah. And of course, we could talk about counterfeiting. And commensurated in it. Marx rightly says that the key thing about money is that without it, products do not confront each other as commodities, but as use values only, not values. So it's small value, small v, use values, but it's not big V values. This means that money presents the moment of their essential unity as values to them when acting as their unique universal equivalent. So you're asking this question of how important is this? Value as one and many is posited more concretely when commodities both exclude the money commodity form from themselves and yet at the same time achieve an adequate expression of value only insofar as it is their common center of attention. Money as the one is the moment at which all attraction and repulsion is brought into unitary focus. However, for value to be actual requires not merely that there's a logical possibility that a money commodity be the unique value equivalent, but this uniqueness is effectively grounded. So that's what happens at the end of Christmas Story, right? It is not the presence of money simply presupposed at this point. Well, more especially, how does gold achieve its unique position here as the universal equivalent? By its own act. Money is already the attractor of commodities because it has immediate exchangeability. This point needs more discussion, of course, needless to say. It is of no moment to enter into a historical treatment of gold's emergence as the money commodity, but we could. The key issue for a systematic dialectical presentation of this fact, quote unquote, is why gold is money now. In the systematic presentation of its role, even the mediations logically presupposed in its development vanish. The money form of value links back to the simple form, having been developed from it by a series of metamorphoses that it must run through in order to win its finished shape. This is why people try to sell you gold-plated coins that aren't real legal tender on television. And what's probably even worse is that people actually buy the damn things. However, the presence of gold money retroactively denies any other commodity the opportunity to run through the dialectic of form to become money. It retroactively denies any other commodity the opportunity to run through the dialectic of form to become money. This brings us to the logic of exclusion. So we've been talking up till now about inclusion. Now you need to sort of have another term. It's like and or not. Commodities must exclude one of their number to serve as the unique universal equivalent. Therefore, if the money commodity is excluded by the others, the fact that it is money only obtains through their activity. Yet, thus, we do not yet have gold existing as money on its own account. It remains, in effect, contingent on that condition of its existence. But if we bear in mind that the dialectic of force and expression ends with the universal equivalent actively asserting itself as value for itself, then it seems better to ask how the activity of the money commodity excludes itself from the other commodities, even if expositionally it appears otherwise. This is why people hold on to their jewelry. The answer is that money maintains itself as value in autonomous form against the other commodities. As their center of attraction, it prevents any other commodity taking its position just because it already acts as value in immediate form in virtue of fulfilling the money functions, their immediate, sort of satisfaction. Accordingly, attracting other commodities to find a place, a value equivalent in it. It seems as if the other commodities excluded gold in the first place. It's kind of how we were born, right? We don't necessarily have a lot of gold around us. But the boot is on the other foot once it becomes active on its own account. The alleged effect, namely exclusion of the money commodity by the other commodity, becomes the cause of itself when money posits the presupposition that it alone was excluded virtually by actually excluding any other claimant to its throne. I know that's a little circular. The reflection of commodities and money into each other is not merely a positing reflection of value in a mere correlation of relative and equivalent poles of value, for this lacks sufficient determinacy in that the position of the commodities could be reversed. Nor is it adequate to its existence that a certain commodity is given a privileged role through some external stipulation. For example, a state issue of a legal tender. And this is exactly what happened, right? The federal government issued gold certificates, which, they were trading certain gold coins for, in terms of equal value. They just wanted to limit their circulation as gold. What is required to give value itself subsistence is a determining reflection in the acquiring sense. Once in actuality, gold is exchangeableness is immediate shape. It posits itself as its own presupposition instead of being posited by its presupposition, namely the commodity manifold. I know that's having sublated its virtual origin in the dialectic of the forms of value. It is not a passive measure of commodity value, but has the sovereign power of immediate exchangeability with other commodities. This is the failure of sovereign citizens to resist the federal government. It's just a delusion that, I don't recognize the federal government. I'm drawing a piece of money that'll pay you the equivalent. Why should I recognize, whatever? I'm bouncing a check. I'm kiting checks on you, essentially. The point is not to show how a process of exclusion occurred, but to show that the logic of money is itself exclusionary. So, although it could be silver, not gold, in the imagination, in actuality, the money commodity, without getting too terribly tautological, is what it is. This seems a mouse of an argument, but this is a point where dialectic must acknowledge its limits, that money is gold, and how gold became so is not a logical point. This is the problem with Marx. But the demonstration of what money is in relation to commodities is a logical investigation. Certainly, dialectic cannot retroject its systemic logic into a historical force. Therewith, the necessity of money to the present system makes itself into a speculative requirement that originally people act so as to fix a commodity as money. This is the question of reserve currencies. It is necessary that there be money, but surely it's not necessary that money be a commodity. Yet in presenting the development of the value form, I proceed, this is Chris Arthur, I proceed to a money commodity when seeking to actualize the universal equivalent form. Why is this? Well, the methodological reason is that each stage of a systematic dialectic supersedes the previous one with a minimum of new material. So there's certain efficiency criterion. In stabilizing the previous determinations, the new form requires only, this is a marginalist position, only the minimum sufficient conditions for this, not necessary conditions. Thus, I do not seek to show that gold is necessary to a capitalist economy, notwithstanding the present flight to gold. That's what I meant when I was talking about, Ron Paul idiots. Gold is not necessary to a capitalist economy. We've already proved that. We proved that for 100+ years. And trying to destroy the capitalist economy in order to reinvigorate gold is, well, certainly it's a fool's task, but, you're going to profit in the short run if you do it properly. Now, and not everyone can do that, of course. That's sort of the point, is that, it's selling a bill of goods to poor people. Rich people can, do it because they have surplus to do it with. The point is that the systematic development cannot have credit money come in straight away, when it is only later in the exposition that it may be developed on the basis that commodity money already exists. At this level, commodity relations is sufficient to solve the present problem by positing a money commodity. Now, whether this proves that you need to have a money commodity is, you can argue that out. But it seems, if you follow the argument that Cleaver shows, the structure of the argument from the commodity to class struggle, and yes, we can argue about class struggle, et cetera, but there are certain structures in that argument that certainly make it reasonable. The logical development of the necessity of money and its functions is required and is carried forward. That's the, if you look at that Cleaver thing, diagram, even if gold is here, it's contingent shell. Later, the defects of gold may be addressed when the means to remedy them have been developed. And that did actually happen, right? Japan untethered itself from gold for a while, and et cetera. Well, still is. And, other things, because the way they treated their economy, they didn't screw up as much. And of course, they didn't have as much money to screw up. So that was another question. The proper measure of value. Let us now explore the form determinations that underpin the proper measure of value. When value appears in finitude, its actuality is that of amount, numbers, right? It used to be weight, right? Remember with gold, you're weighing the gold coins and they should weigh enough, but then there were people running around recasting and re-minting coins that weren't pure gold. And so they were skimming, the difference, right? No one cares, but we saw that little video where that was actually happening. Value as amount is existent as a sum of money, really distinct from other such sums, albeit identical with them as value, and is embodied in commodities of definite worth. Such a sum of money is reflected into itself so that money presents value to us, not an equivalent for which it has no need, but as equivalent to itself. This is the money bin. The money bin, is the money bin, and its self-identity value in money form is equal to itself. It has a reflective relation to itself. So, hold on to your penny collection. Through its mediation, commodity is worth the same sum of money may, by abstraction from that, be said to be of equal worth. Note that to derive the notion of equal worth here may be to hypostasize an abstraction. Still requires a substantive theory for what makes them of equal worth. So, we can talk about equal worth, and, Kamala Harris talks about, people should pay their fair share. It's not about equal worth, and fair share is, sufficiently vague. But it would be quite wrong to say commodities are already of an equal worth before money made possible such an equivalent relation. In money, value is equivalent to itself, whereas the commodity as value is not, because it requires an equivalent form outside it. So we went through all of this arm waving to show that there is a essence and appearance difference in value problems related to money. The presence of money in such finite shapes allows a determinate measure of value to be applied. The category of real measure of value comprehends a triad of moments. And this is what we were talking about in the moment 1, moment 2, moment 3. Imminent magnitude A, monetary medium B, and standard of value C. So yesterday I showed you what a meter might actually look like. There's a standard meter, it's platinum iridium. But the reality, of course, is that it's some other measure of the speed of light. And, it's not quite the same, even though it is the same. Money has the form of a measuring rod of value because of its self-equivalence, just as a ruler is identical in length to itself. Now, yes and no, of course. The plastic ruler that you buy in the store is not necessarily identical, although it seems that measure presupposes a dimension within which things are measured. In our case, the grounding moment is the reverse. That is, when you have this, reversing action, this is how you test it. It is the falsifiable moment. It is the practice of measure that constitutes the dimensionality of value. Now, we went through a long bit of yammering about this to get there, but kind of, this is why there are both qualitative and quantitative elements of this and measure. Without it, the magnitude of value is mere immanence, implicitly quantitative, but without any metric of its own. Money as real measure interjects the form of magnitude onto this immanence. So there are criteria. It's not, and of course, if you sort of accept things at face value, you could get into real trouble. However, value is an immanent magnitude. To gain an index of amount requires a suitable monetary medium in which a real measure of the value of commodities is properly given. Value notionally has immanent magnitude, but this is formless unless there is a monetary medium that crystallizes it and gives it phenomenal measure. And this is the reserve currency issue. To model the ideal immanence of value as an extended magnitude, the monetary medium and its own measure must provide for homogeneity, additivity. These are criteria for saying, how we're going to get to value. You need homogeneity, additivity, divisibility, imperishability, transportability, and so forth. The use of gold is merely a stepping stone toward perfecting this. It's not gold. And you could argue, and I'm not going to do it, but an NFT has some of this. Although in the medium of gold, this function of measure is affected materially, the key requirement is merely that the medium allows for measure, that it makes present in finite form value as an amount of itself. It is clear that this may be done formally in paper denominations, even if the metric is merely notional, as in dollar bills. This is the sort of what we're getting at with cyber currency. Money not only gives the measure, but through this, it enables commodities to gain the quality of being measurable. In the ordinary way, this is not an issue. A thing has weight prior to its relation to the proper measure of its weight. But in our case, practice imposes the abstract form of measure on commodities. Note that it's not actual pork bellies that were traded as commodities. And in fact, we no longer use pork bellies as an official commodity, which is a whole different set of questions. Value is not a substance with a given dimensionality requiring only a numeraire to set up a system of measure. Value gains an immanent magnitude only when the form of measure is practically applied and grounds the required quantitative dimension. So there's all these criteria going on relative to, gold, the gold that you would melt, the gold that you would hide in your attic and put in, the pocket of your suit. In order to give the measure its operational actuality, many Marxists believe it must be a product of labor because it must be of the same nature as what is measured, just as weight is measured in a balance by standard weights, but note the use of a spring balance anyway. However, here we're considering measure as pure form corresponding to our presentation of value as pure immanence. So you've already made some restrictions here. The pure form of measure requires simply a linear metric such that $4 are worth twice $2. Now, that all seems very simple, but it gets a little ugly when we're starting to talk about double eagles and Morgans and a bunch of other things. Money, as a measure of value, grounds the imputation that value exists as a magnitude immanent to commodities. The monetary medium is not so much a suitable measuring rod for a pre-existing magnitude. It gives a space for value to constitute itself as a magnitude. However, the measure function of money simply provides the form of commensuration. How the actual magnitudes are determined is a whole nother question. In Chris Arthur's view, the magnitude of value remains indeterminate until conceptualized as the result of capitalist competition. That's the fundamental thing that kind of is embodied in a lot of presumptions about policy. But if there is some determination of magnitude, it is negatory, negative, unless the money form provides the dimension of magnitude in the first place. It is also necessary to distinguish the medium of value required for magnitude to become a monetary measure from that of standard of value. Thus, if the monetary measure is gold, this still leaves the standard pound of gold to be determined. So it's still stupid. The index of magnitude of the standard then models the positive dimensionality of the imminent magnitudes. You have a reversal there. This concretizes the presupposition of a single measure that was unfulfilled at the level of mere exchange values of commodities, which failed to unify the commodities in a single order. We may now speak of money as the value measure proper. And if it takes shape in a medium with an index of amount, we have a workable system of measurements. This means that the value of a commodity appears as less than, equal to, or more than the value of another, which is clear as mud because, we wanted it to be unitary, but it's not. Money makes commodities comparable in value. However, there's more to money than the measure function. Value, although taking finite mode in sums of money or is embodied in commodities, is not fully individuated. Sums of money must be numerically different from one another. But notice that this difference is purely notional, currency exchanges. For this numerical difference in sums of money is equally sublated in a combined sum of money when the different amounts merge into one amount. Bits of money are ideally attracted into one, but are notionally distinguished by a notional repulsion materially affected by the bearers of value. In other words, NFTs, Bitcoins, blah, blah, blah. Two different accounts, each containing $10, achieves the necessary separation of amounts of value by purely formal means. But notice that if I have $10 in an account and I enter a further 10, I do not have two 10s as if the account were a cash box. I have a single sum of $20. So here the amount of pure magnitude takes precedence over that of numerical difference. Even so, I can redivide the amount by withdrawing, let's say, $12. Commodities come, of course, in incommensurate physical amounts, but their money values are not merely commensurable such that the relative worth of commodities may be compared. However, they are additive. A heterogeneous basket of commodities cannot be bodily merged, but their ideality as value allows money to do so. So, this is a long way to get to the point of you've created these abstract measures of things, and you can measure them because conceiving them in certain abstract forms has a certain path. And we do actually make these kinds of decisions about this, not only at an individual level, but at a collective level. As a homogeneous amount of value, what they're worth together may be stated as one sum of money, nor is the summing achieved by abstraction as when one cat and one dog make two animals. Values are not distinguishable from one another except in magnitude. Hence, there's no need to abstract from qualitative difference in order to sum them. Conversely, pure magnitude is not sufficient to separate them, for ideally they merge to form one magnitude. But as embodied, for example, in coin or in dogs and cats, value is peculiar in that the magnitudes are ideally one, yet materially many numerically. This practical fact that all values may merge into one sum of money shows that value is one substance, not a class of independently existing substances. So you do have this one, values of substance incarnated in money and is the social substance of commodities. This is a long way to get there, but he's trying to prove that it's not an abstraction. It has some social set of relations because we either had to think about it, we had to come to an agreement, a contingent relationship with it in order to get it to be measurable. We're almost at the end. Since value is a substance, Marx can properly speak of the metamorphoses of commodities and how a substance here, value, changes shape in finite mode. That is, how is something that sort of is, when it becomes finite, how it doesn't move around, and how also can characterize capital as a self-moving substance. So how can you have both of these things? How is it that you can have, this self-moving substance? It's a substance, but it's also self-moving. And yes, we raised that question at the front end. How is it that we have multiple moments? How is it that these multiple moments, because of the logic, and the logic more specifically of capitalism, creates new value? Double entry bookkeeping, compounding interest. That's how it works. Not that it works exactly this way, but these are examples of how it operates. To conclude, finally, we'll get to the end. This is Christopher Arthur's writing. You can take it up with him. Now, the point I want to make before I conclude is that this was modeled after the appendix on value form. It's written by Marx, I suppose modified by Engels. I think specifically the 1867 version, but the point is that it has a certain shape and has been given importance by a variety of scholars. Now, whether this is the be all and end all of the problem is a whole different question, but you've got to take that up with Heinrich and Moseley and the two Pauls and a bunch of other stuff. So that's still debatable. But the point is, I think that you can see that there is a certain Hegelian current there that says that, as we engage the world, we start engaging it in a way that has finitude. It may seem quite infinite, but it's material, and it kind of proves that materiality, not in the Hegelian sense, but in the Marxian sense. You try and account for it in actual reality, in realization. To conclude, I underline that the systematic presentation of the value form moves from simple abstract categories to ones less so. To begin with, we identified value with the elementary quality of exchangeableness. We end it by showing that value is a unitary substance incarnated in money. In other words, there was exchangeableness, but then there was exchangeability. And I know that's like the difference between tick and tock, but it is, and or. It's a kind of logical relation. And in reality, that's kind of how it exists. And constantly try and mess with it in ways to our detriment. Now, I included, of course, to remind you that this is all a system of circuits, that rent is a highly abstracted version of that. I tried to apply the semiotic square to it because it allows us to look at oppositions and complements. I've suggested that circuits of capital exist in nested forms. That can be observed in the standard production function. Well, not standard, a production function, let's put it that way. And you can see how this articulates itself in the Marxian model. You can see here that there are two production functions, two moments of purchase, acquisition, the decision-making of buying something. And these are multiple circuits of capital that Department 1 and Department 2 are sphere of production, sphere of exchange, and that it exists in a circular, a circuitry arrangement, and that it can be made more complicated, as you can see here. It has multiple forms of appearance when it becomes capital. That is the difference between industrial capital, commercial capital, and money dealing capital, which is what we've been looking at recently. And it can be manifest in a variety of ways: trading banks, investment banks, real estate, actual regular banks, insurance, and then the regular stock. And then you see you have Department 1 and 2, labor producing surplus value, labor not producing surplus value, which is an interesting argument worth fighting about. And there is a Department 3 about the questions of productive versus unproductive labor. Okay, so we have means of circulation. I talked a little bit about kind of capital development. This is Mandel's argument for what the whole damn thing looks like. It's not quite like that, but made a few other comments, things about metaphor. I included the semiotics of money. You may or may not be interested in that, but in fact, the semiotics of money describes that moment between moment 1, moment 2, and moment 3. And then I included the value form 1867 version because essentially Christopher Arthur was following this exact argument. That's why it became long and tedious. He sort of followed the same set of arguments. It's clearer, with all due respect, it's actually clearer in the Chris Arthur version than it is in the Marx version, but he is essentially making the same value form argument, which is the value form argument made sort of in part by the same, the usual suspects. So that's included here. I include a couple of other diagrams. I include another version of the David Harvey one because I don't want to scroll back and forth. I want to represent to you that there is a logic here. It is a logic that can be engaged in programming, not and or, there's a logical relation between these, between limiters and expanders. the capitalist system has a bunch of other things that are part of the accumulation problem. Even though we emphasize accumulation, there's certainly a lot of stuff going on. It is those accumulations that create the historical materialist model of, periods, historical periods of modes of production, and where forces of production change, and the necessity, hopefully, of a social revolution occurs. That's a whole nother question. Where there are relations of production, which is what we described with the relations of money, which I've just described, and then there's stuff that happens. History happens from a primitive society, which sometimes we privilege and imagine in a utopian way that we could perhaps get back to. Why the hell do we go camping, in other words? And a classless society up at the end where we don't need money or even a gold-pressed Latin. So anyway, all right, I got to the end. How far along am I? People are here. God. But maybe I lost all of you in this audio problem. Money clipping, all of the commodities, but gold. That's a useful question. We have to get to that. Circular gibberish. Yes, it does sound like circular gibberish because it really, he spent a long time talking about that, but I sort of wanted to go through it because it does have, maybe by the volume of gibberish, you could actually say that's kind of what happens. There's a certain system of abstractions, and they're not difficult, they're intelligible, and they are material, and they're only material because people have to interact with them, and we do this at infinite levels, and this is what causes the problems. It doesn't happen because God makes it so, or some other agency, some other whatever. It's stuff happens, and it happens in a material form. It's not God or chance or luck or whatever, the luck of the draw or whatever. So I think I've answered all the questions. Questions, comments, brickbats. I'm sorry I dropped out. It's nothing much I can do about it. I mean, it's my network is a network. I don't have too many options to change. Yes, I am actually getting a better network, but this is after I fix a whole bunch of other stupid little things in my stupid little house. So
Got better at one, it seems to me.
well, I tried to keep a standard distance from the microphone, and I started yelling. Not that that helped any.
I'm going to have to think about this a while, the magic that becomes money.
I think what, for me, and for thinking about this as an idea, it was, Marx thought about this for a long time. This is not just about Hegel. This is about going back to Epicureanism. It is philosophically, it is the reason why the pre-Socratics are important from a Greek point of view. This is what he wrote his dissertation on. It is this way of rethinking the way the world is, and not that Marx was the only person working on this. A whole bunch of people working on this. Some people still work on this. It is this idea that we have to think of the world in slightly different ways, and ways that don't hurt other people. It's very Buddhist when you get right down to it. We're trying to do no harm, and capitalism, the whole modus operandi of capitalism is harm. And lest you think that's unimportant, that's the current election season. Is someone is at least claiming that they'll do less harm. The other person is just about harm.
Yikes.
Hearing no further objections and new chat options, and yes, I did speak far too long, but I wanted to get to the end like I usually attempt to do. What is the time? Oh, Jesus. Well, I went exactly as long as I thought it was going to go. Other things need to happen. So I will.
I did.
End the live stream so you can all curse at each other or curse